All right, so again, welcome to Honest Conversations about Racism 2.0. I'm Natasha Bias, and my co-presenter is Ana Viana, and we are members of the Racial Justice Committee of St. John's Parish, and we are presenting, I guess, session number 5 of our 6 series session, Honest Conversations about Racism. Next, please. So this evening, our goal is to discuss past and current disparities in the healthcare system for African Americans, ranging from historical mistrust in medical care to the inequity in treatment and access to care.
We'll start with our opening prayer from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. When our eyes do not see the gravity of racial justice, shake us from our slumber and open our eyes, O Lord. When out of fear we are frozen into inaction, give us a spirit of bravery, O Lord. When we try our best but say the wrong things, give us a spirit of humility, O Lord. When the chaos of this dies down, give us lasting spirit of solidarity, O Lord. When it becomes easier to point fingers outwards, help us to examine our own hearts, O Lord. God of truth, in your wisdom, enlighten us. God of hope, in your kindness, heal us. Creator of all people, in your generosity, guide us. Amen.
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 We have the same agreement we've been using throughout the session. We ask that everybody stay open, collaborate virtually, respect confidentiality. We can share stories but not names. Listen fully, extend grace, be visible, remain on screen as much as possible. Embrace one another's company and perspective. If for some reason you're uncomfortable with any of these, we respectfully ask that you sign off and you can review everything afterwards. It'll be posted on St. John's website. Next slide.
I will abstain from all intentional wrongdoing and harm. Now, that is the Hippocratic Oath. Many people know it as first, do no harm. And that's an oath that doctors have to take. And there's a history to it. This is the English translation of the Greek Hippocratic Oath from 1923. The oldest partial fragment is dated back to circa AD 275. And then there's also a version in the Vatican Library from the 10th and 11th century. But as we go through this presentation, just remember, I will abstain from all intentional wrongdoing and harm. Disparities in healthcare based on race have deep roots. From 1619 to 1730, as most of us know, Africans were enslaved and transported to the American colonies to be treated as property, and as property, receiving little to no medical treatment. Next slide, please. Early roots of inoculation. So in 1721, Onesimus is an enslaved man. He told his owner about how he became immune to smallpox after he had exposed himself to the bacteria through an open wound. I guess an early form of inoculation. Then in 18th century in Boston, people considered it to be superstitious or scary. And they refused vaccination. Then a doctor, Zabdiel Boylston, following Onesimus's method, experimented on other enslaved people and used their results to illustrate the effectiveness of this procedure. Next slide, please.
Claims of unequal and different. In the 1830s, Samuel George Morton claimed Black people had smaller skulls than white people and thus smaller brains. Experts contend this work provided the foundation for scientific racism. In 1845, there was a call for a national medical convention, which led to the establishment of the American Medical Association for white male doctors. In the mid-1800s, Surgeon James Marion Sims became known as the father of modern gynecology for developing surgical techniques that helped white women through difficult childbirth by experimenting on enslaved Black women in makeshift hospitals behind his house in Alabama. Next slide. The claims continue. In 1851, Dr. Samuel Cartwright was charged by the Medical Association of Louisiana with investigating the diseases and physical peculiarities of the Negro race. His report including 3 diseases: drapetomania, which he said caused slaves to run away; rascality, which made slaves commit petty offenses; and dysesthesia aethiopica, which made slaves insensible and indifferent to punishment. Next slide. In 1855, John Brown, a man who escaped from enslavement, published his autobiography, Slave Life in Georgia, a narrative of the life, suffering, and escape of John Brown, a fugitive slave now in England. The book includes details of his abuse and torture by Dr. Thomas Hamilton, who was obsessed with proving that physiological differences between Black and white people existed.
An excerpt from his book. Having completed his series of experiment on me in the heated pit and allowed me some days rest, I was put on a diet, and then during a period of about 3 weeks, he bled me every other day. At the end of that time, he found I was failing, so he left off, and I got a month's rest to regain a little strength. At the expiration of that time, he set to work to ascertain how deep my Black skin went. This he did by applying blisters to my hands, legs, feet, which bear the scars to this day. Next slide, please.
Between 1861 and 1865, during the Civil War, there were separate wards for wounded Black soldiers in the Union Army. They were poorly staffed. Black soldiers would die from wounds that white soldiers would recover from due to lack of supplies and treatment. As we know, in 1863, Emancipation Proclamation declared that all enslaved people in southern states were freed. Next slide. In 1864, Rebecca Lee Crumpler becomes the first Black woman to earn a medical degree, later caring for formerly enslaved people in Virginia. In 1865, Freedmen's Hospital was established in Washington, D.C. By the fall of 1865, there were 8 doctors and 12 hospitals to treat 4 million people. More than 40 hospitals opened in the following years, but with continued defunding of the medical division during Johnson's administration by 1868, only 11 Bureau hospitals remained open. All except the hospital in D.C. were closed in the next 4 years. Interestingly enough, inspectors were sent to these hospitals before they closed, and if they noted improvements, the hospitals would be closed because no government funding was needed. If inspectors noted no improvements, then the hospitals would be closed because poor conditions would make the hospitals inoperative. Next slide.
Ac- So in 1868, while considering whether or not to allow female physicians as members, the AMA injected race into the discussion, arguing that it would not interfere with the admission of the local societies either with respect to either sex or race. So in 1895, the National Medical Association was established, being a collective voice of more than 30,000 African American physicians and the patients they served. I will note that in 2008, at the National American Medical Association convention, the president did issue a public apology to the National Medical Association for its century-long holding of racial and discriminatory practices against African American physicians and patients. Next slide, please. Access to treatment. So in 1915, the CDC's National Negro Health Week had begun, and this was in response to disturbing findings by the Tuskegee Institute that highlighted the poor health status of African Americans in the early part of the 20th century. Efforts were towards educating members of the community, providing greater access to healthcare, and encouraging an increased number of African American professionals in the field of public health. On the right, you will see a poster that was an advertisement that was issued in 1932. And there were about 600 poor sharecroppers, African Americans, who answered the call to this poster. And it promised healthcare, treatment, and burial expenses for people who possibly had bad blood. So as we say, it says, do you have bad blood? Next slide, please.
April 10th, 1945, Ed Cade, an African-American construction worker, becomes the first test subject in the human radiation experiment by being injected with plutonium without consent.
The Manhattan Project helped doctors better understand the effects of radioactivity on the human body. From 1945 to 1947, at 4 hospitals around the country, patients received plutonium injections without their consent. An African-American construction worker, Eb Cade, was injected in April 1945 at an Oak Ridge hospital. Author Denise Kiernan describes the so-called plutonium files.
I came across the files related to plutonium research and research into the effect of plutonium on human beings. And there was a black construction worker who was coming into work at K25 one morning who got in a car accident. He and the guys in the car with him. There was a car accident about a mile away from K25, and he was taken to the hospital. And he had a broken leg among other injuries, and instead of being having his leg set immediately, they injected him with plutonium without his consent, and they wanted to track that plutonium and see where it went through his body, which is why they did not set his leg immediately. And they would take urine and feces samples at certain intervals. They wanted to see whether or not it had penetrated his teeth, so they removed, I think it was 15 of his teeth to see if it had gone there. So that testing was something that I was really bowled over and shocked by. And a lot of this information just came out, became available in the 90s. And there was a commission on human radiation experiments under, I think it was during the Clinton administration. And they said, we want all these records out and we want everybody to be able to look into them. And they interviewed a lot of the doctors who were a part of it and, released as many files and as many papers as they could.
The Manhattan Project helped.
In 1947, 2 years later, Elmer Allen, a 36-year-old African-American railroad reporter, was injected with plutonium in his left calf after being diagnosed with bone cancer. 3 days later, his leg was amputated and tissue samples from the severed limb were studied for plutonium. He was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic later on by his family doctor after claiming he had received the injection during a secret experiment. Next slide. October 51, Henrietta Lacks, a 31-year-old African-American mother of 5 from Virginia, died of cervical cancer. Medical researchers use her cancer cells known as the HeLa cell line.
Some of the most important advancements in modern medical research can ultimately be traced back to a black woman who worked on a tobacco farm before World War II. Her name was Henrietta Lacks. In February 1951, Lacks was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cervical cancer at the Johns Hopkins Hospital. Unbeknownst to her, a sample of her cells was sent to a tissue lab. A cell biologist isolated and then multiplied it.
As it turned out, the cells did not die, as would normally be the case. And in fact, they were doubling at this phenomenal rate. They would just keep replicating.
Although these weren't the first human cells to be grown in a lab, this was the first time they survived more than a few days. This huge medical breakthrough allowed researchers to conduct experiments on human cells outside of the body. The cells were given the name HeLa, a combination of the first 2 letters of Henrietta Lacks' first and last names. Although they carry her name, Lacks, who passed away at the young age of 31, would never know that her cells had been extracted for scientific research. Lacks' family members only learned that her cells had been harvested 2 decades after her death. A Rolling Stone journalist contacted them and revealed that Lacks' cells had been duplicated and then used for research by countless scientists. The article called the work a critical tool in medical research. While HeLa cells have played a crucial role in scientific advancement, the fact that Lacks herself never consented to the research means that her cells were used unethically. What's more, her case was part of a long tradition of the use of African American bodies without their consent for medical and scientific research, dating back to slavery and including the infamous Tuskegee syphilis study.
It was part of a culture of not respecting the core humanity of black folk and how they were being treated either by medical researchers or even by physicians.
Despite the ethical debate around the harvesting of Lacks cells, scientists have continued to use the immortal HeLa cell line all over the world. Research involving polio vaccines, chemotherapy, HIV/AIDS, cloning, and IVF have all benefited from the HeLa cell line.
So in 1964, the Civil Rights Act was signed by President Kennedy. And it said, no person in the United States shall, on the ground of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving financial assistance. The National Medical Association, and having their eye toward healthcare, really pushed and advocated for this law to be passed. We all know about it regarding public school rights to desegregate public schools, housing and such. But since any program or activity is defined as any corporation, partnership, private organization, or sole proprietorship that principally engages in the business of providing education, healthcare, housing, social services, or parks and recreation, they fall under this if you receive federal funds. So this was to open the door to access to healthcare for African Americans and other people of color. Next slide, please. So in July 25th, 1972, Associated Press reporter Jean Heller broke news that rocked the American medical establishment. The federal government, she reported, had let hundreds of Black men in rural Alabama go untreated for syphilis for 40 years for research purposes. A public outcry ensued, and the Tuskegee syphilis study ended 3 months later. And so again, that was as you see, the flyer that we had shown in previous slides. That was the call for people, and they participated in this Tuskegee syphilis study unknowingly. Next slide, please.
Okay.
The Tuskegee study was no secret. 15 articles have been issued by the government over the last 40 years. The first was actually presented to the American Medical Association's convention in 1936. Nevertheless, it was not until 1972 that an alert newspaper woman broke the story. Now, after 40 years, the government has launched an investigation. Dr. Vernal Cave is one of the 5 blacks on the 9-member investigating panel.
We will look into the Tuskegee situation in depth to find out what happened along the way, and we will be making recommendations or observations or recommendations with regard to this. I understand also that we will be asked to look into the whole matter of human experimentation. You see, although this is a rather dramatic episode, and one which people can readily relate to and understand, human experimentation can be rather extensive. And we have to find out to what extent the disadvantaged, the non-white, the poor, the underprivileged, to what extent are they being used not as human beings, but as guinea pigs, and to look into what we have been doing and to come up with a program to see that those who are in relatively or absolutely helpless situations are not taken advantage of in order that we can so-called push back the frontiers of ignorance.
In addition to the medical controversy, the Tuskegee study points up a moral issue. Is human life too precious to be wasted in scientific experimentation? It also opens itself to the charge of racism. Will a responsible governmental agency ever conceive of an experiment on human life, using whites as guinea pigs? Is racism so deep-seated that black life has economic but not social value? That blacks are only useful when earning a profit, but valueless in making a significant contribution to society? Syphilis is a curable disease. But what about racism?
So in 1986, there was a report of the Secretary's Task Force on Black and Minority Health, known as the Heckler Report, was released, which documented the existence of health disparities among racial ethnic minorities in the United States, and called the disparities an affront both to our ideals and to the ongoing genius of American medicine. It is a very comprehensive report, and there are various series that continue throughout the year. This was the first one. One of the items that was covered was infant death rates. It indicated that in 1983, there were 39,400 infant deaths, which would be 10.9 deaths per 1,000 live births. Now, this was compared to the 1900s when it was 100 deaths per 1,000 live births. When you dig a little deeper, in 1950, there were 43.9 deaths of Black infants every 1,000 births, and 26.8 deaths of infants for every 1,000 white infant births. In 1983, the statistic was 20 Black infant deaths per 1,000 live births, and then 10.5 white infant deaths for every 1,000 live births. They attributed low income, inadequate insurance, pre-existing disease, poor nutrition, inadequate housing, limited maternal education, stressful work environment, disruptive family, lack of social support, and also problems with transportation, which impeded access to services. In general overall health, the report indicated that the factors presumed to influence minority health were demographic profile, nutritional status and dietary practices, environmental and occupational exposure, and stress and coping patterns. Interestingly, in 1899, in a book that was authored by sociologist and activist W.E. Du Bois, The Philadelphia Negro, he argued that the difference in health outcomes for Blacks and whites had more to do with living conditions as opposed to genetics. Next slide, please.
Kennedy Krieger, Baltimore, Maryland study. 1990, lead-based paint abatement and repair maintenance study enrolled families with children from 6 months to 4 years old in more than 100 houses that had been given various levels of abatement. Researchers monitored lead in the children's blood. In 2001, the Maryland Appellate Court likened this to the Tuskegee experiment. The government's response. In 2003, the Healthcare Equality and Accountability Act passes. This was introduced sponsored by Congressman Elijah Cummings. And this was to help improve minority health and healthcare and eliminate racial and ethnic disparities in health and healthcare. Some of the grants that they were given were to help programs that would help in these minority groups, to help them not just provide with healthcare, but to give them navigators to manage the care for the individuals and to help with the outreach services. In 2005, the CDC establishes the Health Disparities Subcommittee, which provides counsel to the CDC director on CDC's efforts to address health disparities in achieving the agency's overreaching health impact goals. This committee supports the development of specific health disparity objectives, performance indicators, and agency priorities, and advocates for action on health disparities. In 2005, African Americans are 10 times more likely than white and nearly 3 times more likely than Latinos to have AIDS. This comes after a survey show from the New York Times that 10% of African Americans believe AIDS was created specifically to target African Americans. Next one. 2007, medical apartheid, the dark history of medical experimentation on Black Americans from Colonial Times to the Present, a book by Harriet Washington, is published. In 2010, the Henrietta Lack Foundation is formed by Rebecca Skloot. Their mission is to help families that underwent medical experiments without consent. The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, also a book by Rebecca Skloot, is published.
Next slide. So in 2011, the CDC releases first of its 6 periodics called the CDC Health Disparities and Inequalities Report. This provided analysis and reporting of the recent trend and ongoing variations in health disparities and inequalities in selected social and health indicators. And so the report kind of specified 22 specific facts that contributed to inequality. And they're divided into these 5 categories. So social determinants would mean education and income. Environmental hazards would be unhealthy air quality, inadequate and unhealthy housing. Access, outcomes, mortality rates would be obesity, diabetes, heart disease, outcomes morbidity, outcomes behavioral risk, and that would also include infant mortality, preterm labor, substance abuse, in those instances. And those are items or facts that contribute to the disparities and inequalities for healthcare. Next slide, please. So interestingly, in the report, it referenced Healthy People 2020 because it was in 2011. And so they were looking to the future and thinking of goals that would be reached by 2020. But when you hit that link, it's now Healthy People 2030. So now we're projecting the same thing. We're projecting out to 2030. And as you see, the wheel and social determinants of health, it's what we've heard before, right? Education access and quality, healthcare access and quality, economic stability, social and community context, and neighborhood and built environment. So those are still the things, the attributes, the determinants of health. Next slide, please. Taking a look at the elements. So on April 25 of 2014, as a cost-saving measure, Flint, Michigan switches its water supply to the Flint River, which introduced lead poisoned water into the homes and created a massive public health crisis. Of course, lead is toxic to humans, and more than half of Flint residents are Black. It wasn't until January the 2nd of 2015 that the residents of Flint were notified by the city officials that the water that they had consumed had violated the Safe Drinking Water Act. The water was verified to have high levels of TTHM, which can cause multiple medical complications if consumed and when consumed in large amounts. In September 5th of 2022, the Department of Public Works issued a required boil water advisory that was here in Baltimore for residents and businesses and other facilities in portions of West Baltimore. And precautionary boil water advisory was issued for residents beyond that immediate service area, advising that drinking water should be boiled or is to be boiled before consumption. In that area, about 64% of the citizens are African American. That was from the census that was conducted, that statistic. Next slide, please. So lawsuit, Jackson, Mississippi, drinking water. The plaintiffs, including the NAACP, had claimed that the defendants had engaged in a long-standing pattern of practice of systematically depriving Jackson the funds it needs to operate and maintain its water facilities. State agencies did so, the lawsuit claims, by diverting federal funds meant for Jackson to majority white communities, while the legislature strangled Jackson by refusing its pleas for funding as the water and sewer system imploded. In October of 2022, the EPA did announce that it was investigating the clean water crisis. Next slide, please.
Lingering assumptions. So we're hoping in 2016 that we've moved past some of our old information or biases. But there was a study at the University of Virginia where half of 222 white medical students and residents surveyed at the University of Virginia believe Blacks and whites are biologically different, according to a paper published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. They also believe Black people felt less pain than whites, and thus were more likely to suggest inappropriate medical treatment for Black patients. In 2016, in collaboration with the Association of State and Territorial Health Officials, CDC published a special supplement to the Journal of Public Health Management and Practice, focusing on health equity, titled Strengthening the Science and Practice of Health Equity in Public Health. And in this paper, they highlighted that the important things that they needed to work on were programs towards achieving health equity, emerging evidence of program practice, health equity actions to ensure all population groups living within an area have access to resources that promote and protect health, infrastructure, prevention through organizational structures and functions, measurement of health disparities, health inequities, and social determinants of health to support the advancement of health equity, and policy approaches to advancing health equity. Next slide. January 16, 2020, the National Center for Health Statistics release of 2018 data on pregnancy-related deaths, showing Black women die 2.5 more often than white women. Hispanic women have the lowest rate of maternal mortality. On a side note, the U.S. happens to have the worst maternal mortality rate in developed nations. In this study, they mentioned for the first time that the United States had standardized maternal mortality data from all 50 states. They had planned to do this in 2007, but weren't able to get all the states to be on a standard set until 2017, giving us the results on 2018. While they can't confirm why the reasons this mortality with Black women is so much higher than the others, they're hoping that now that all the states have the same standards, that they'll be able to work towards identifying and reducing the pregnancy-related deaths across the country. Next slide.
What you don't see is what they get. So there are a number of studies. The first is a representation of race and skin tone in medical textbook imagery. And this was in 2018. These two professors looked at 4,146 images from 5 textbooks on human anatomy. And what it showed was that 74% depicted either white or light skin tones, 21% depicted people of medium skin tone, and 4.5% depicted people of dark skin tone. Now, although they say that there was some proportion to a racial identity, the fact is that the 74% depicted either white or light skin. The second study well, why don't we take Black people's pain seriously? That was the title. And there was a study where they provided people with various scenarios, white people with various scenarios, in determining how they would rate a pain that a white person would feel and pain that a Black person would feel. And 73% of the participants either believed one or more of these things. Either Black people's nerve endings are less sensitive than white people's, that Black people's blood coagulates more quickly than white people's, that Black people have stronger immune systems than white people, that Black people's skin is thicker than white people, and that Black couples are significantly more fertile than white couples. This was 2020. Then we have in 2021, diversity of skin images and medical texts, recommendations for student advocacy and medical education. And this was a study looking at the representation of images in dermatology books, and there was an overrepresentation of light skin tones. In 2006, the study showed that only 4 to 18% of the images were dark skin tone. In reviewing New England Journal of Medicine that was published between the years of 1992 to 2017, there were only 8% of the images of dark-skinned people. This study is aimed to educate from within the ground up and to change things from the ground up. And that is, medical students, people starting out in the medical field, and professors, so that they go into the profession knowing these things. Because again, if you can't diagnose what you can't see, and you can't treat what you don't diagnose. Next slide, please. So COVID enters the equation. In 2020, CDC's COVID-19 response added a chief of health equity officer. Their role was to provide all response approach to identifying and addressing health disparities. The COVID response health equity style guide that eventually became the health equity guiding principles for inclusive communication was published. Also in 2021, CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky declares racism a public health threat that directly affects the well-being of millions of people in the United States. The CDC launched a website, Racism and Health, to serve as a hub for the agency's efforts and a catalyst for greater education and dialogue around these critical issues. Next slide, please.
As the number of cases and deaths continues to mount, a clearer picture is forming of the disproportionate toll COVID-19 is having on Black people and communities of color. In New York City, the U.S. epicenter, Blacks and Hispanics are dying at roughly twice the rate of whites. In Chicago, Blacks are dying at nearly 3 times the rate of whites. And in New Mexico, Native Americans account for more than half of all confirmed cases, despite being only 11% of the population.
The disparities that existed that are being unearthed during COVID, they existed before COVID.
Dr. Andrew Marshall is an emergency physician at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston.
There's a long history of disadvantage in this country. When you think about access to healthcare, when you think about access to healthy food, when you think about job security, the things that many of us enjoy and we take for granted, that make it really hard for certain communities to be healthy.
Experts point to long-standing social and racial inequities. Bates Chamberlain's loved ones
disparities in treatment, COVID. So, racial and ethnic disparities in outpatient treatment in COVID-19 here in the United States. There was a report that showed racial and ethnic disparities persisted in outpatient COVID-19 treatment through July 2022. I mean, we have heard about the disparity in treatment of people who got into the hospital, weren't able to get into the hospital, denied treatment there, but this focuses on outpatient treatment. So during April to July of 2022, the percentage of COVID patients ages over 20 years old treated with Paxlovid was 36% lower among Black patients than among white and non-Hispanic patients. These disparities existed among all age groups and patients with immunocompromised conditions. Next slide, please.
So as of May 11th, 2023, COVID emergency is officially over in the United States. And what does that mean? For us, it means that the coverage, cost, and payment for COVID-19 testing, treatments, and vaccines will change. Medicaid coverage and federal match rates are going to be affected. Telehealth visits are going to be affected. Other Medicaid and CHIP flexibilities will be affected. Other Medicare payment and coverage flexibilities will be affected. Other private insurance coverages flexibilities will be affected. Access to medical countermeasures, vaccines, tests, treatments, all those mobile hubs we've seen around are going to disappear. And liability, immunity to administer medical countermeasures. That's all going to be affected. Do we think the disparity will still exist? I'll let you decide. Next slide. We've covered a lot about the physical health, and I'm going to do a little bit on mental health. Next slide. Culture, race, and ethnicity, a supplement to mental health, a report on the Surgeon General in August of 2001. Racial stereotypes and negative images can be internalized and denigrating individual self-worth and adversely affecting their social and psychological functioning. Racism and discrimination by societal institutions have resulted in minorities' lower socioeconomic status and poorer living conditions in which poverty, crime, and violence are persistent stressors that can affect mental health. And racism and discrimination are stressful events that can directly lead to psychological distress and physiological changes affecting mental health.
So we're going to break out into groups, and the groups will be discussing and these two questions. One is which content which content did you find most disturbing or enlightening? And the other question is about what, if any, characteristics had you learned or believed, and if those have been proven to be false. So actually at this point in time, we'd like to just take a few minutes if those of you would like to share with the group, and then we'll take it from there. But just if whether it's the facilitators or just the members, but again, we're just going to be diligent and focusing on time. But if someone would like to share, please feel free to do so. And hopefully the sharing would be about how we can take action. I can't see everyone.
Group one, Maria, your group.
Okay, well, glad you asked me, because I think we had some very good comments in the group. And I think what a big surprise for all of us, I think, was that we didn't about the plutonium experiments. Then the others thought was that this done was without having the consent to any of this, to just use people that way. And so most of us knew about the HeLa cells, and we also, that there is the book, I think, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, and that it was highly recommended. So, that may be something for other people also interesting. And for the second question, we kind of were cut short. We weren't able to get to this, most of us. But I think when you ask about action, it's to continue the dialogue, to kind of not to quit, not to give up, and to open up the spectrum of thinking or whatever, that people will respect and honor each group in this society. So that doesn't come from me. That was one of our members who made a great statement that way.
Thank you. Group 2, Liz, any action steps?
We didn't get to any action steps, but we did have really good conversations. So I really appreciate the members in my group. So thank you.
Okay. Group 3, Don and Terry.
Yeah, I think actually Teresa ended up facilitating for us. But again, as Liz mentioned, I don't know that we came out with specific actions or takeaways other than perhaps just more shock of the state of this country and the question why. And so maybe not so much action, but is, what can we do to make a difference?
Thank you. Group 4, Anna.
So our big shock too in our group seemed to be the plutonium. We did have questions on the Henrietta Lack, and I did want to mention this, as I mentioned to the group, that there are lawsuits pending, both against Hopkins and they've filed now an initial lawsuit against one of the pharmaceutical companies that profited a lot from the HeLa cells. But they did say that there are more pharmaceutical companies to follow. And then on the second question, we were just kind of shocked that in 2016, that survey, people were still thinking about, the beliefs from the 1800s and earlier. We didn't really get into the actions, but we do want to mention one thing that will be on the resources also. If anybody has the National Geographic channel or the Smithsonian channel, they did put a program out called The Color of Care, produced by Oprah, that was so informative about not just the COVID statistics, which is what prompted the production of the program, but the history as well, and the concerns about just how our doctors are now, and how we should change their thinking from school.
Thank you. Group 5, I had Teresa down for you. Who was Group 5 and how did you guys do?
Scott, for some reason, I was started out in 5 and then was jumped over to 3. So
Group 5, is everybody else okay?
Mark and I managed quite well, and we had a very good discussion.
Right.
Oh my, it was just the two of you?
Yeah, the two of us, we were both there. So I think, I'd say there was some hope in that somebody's daughter is being accepted into dental school, and they're really insisting on diversity in the intake in medical school. So maybe there is some change in the wind. So that's a sign of hope. There was also some discussion as to whether this was primarily a socioeconomic problem, but then against that there is still the distrust of of African American people and other minorities for the medical system because of all that's happened, and that really adversely affects the outcome. So it becomes a sort of vicious cycle downward. I pointed out that I was very shocked by the statistic from the University of Virginia about what white students thought, but there's also the situation that there are really some diseases which affect some populations disproportionately, and particularly sickle cell disease. And I know two cases where I'm very close to, where the attention to that disease is not what it should be, and people die when I don't think they should die because it's a very severe disease affecting the African American population. So disproportionately, well, African American and Southern European, but mostly it's an African American issue, and it's a big problem in Africa, and it's a big problem here. And I know two people quite close to me who have died from sickle cell in this country.
No, it's too bad.
Thank you, Sarah, and Marcus, and all of Group 5. That's our reports.
So is there anyone, oh yeah, so Chris, you have your hand up.
I do. I actually have a couple of actions that we can take. So Cruz Oviedo, if you guys don't know me, I'm a Latina. I am very involved in the community. I'm really trying to bring equity to the forefront here in our county and beyond. There's two initiatives that I want to bring to everybody's attention. One is Howard County did not have and still is, it's putting together a program for maternity care for those who are uninsured and underinsured. We got for the first time last year in the fiscal year 2022-2023, we were able to get 1.3 million from the county executive to start something. This year in the proposed budget that just came out for this next fiscal year, there's 1.7 million allocated to continue this program. So that's one action that if you guys feel strongly about, you could send letters to the county executive showing your support and to the county council showing your support to protect this funding, because this funding goes to those who are underinsured, uninsured, who do not qualify, who have mothers who are pregnant and do not have access to care, throughout pregnancy. So that's one item. Then the other item that I also want to elevate, sadly, there was a push at the state level to try to get insurance for all, regardless of immigration status. Sadly, that did not pass. However, the fight is not over. I know that CASA is the one that's really spearheading all of this, and there's people involved from all over the state. There's going to try to be like amendments and requests and things like that. So that's another thing that could be done, where, if you feel strongly to just write to your delegates, write to your congressmen's, like your representatives, I guess is the word I'm trying to look for, just letting them know that we need those, that if we really want to create equity in health, and if we want to really create health justice, we need to fix the system, and we need to allow everybody who is living here in our state to access care, to have health care that's equitable, that's affordable. It's just the right thing to do. So those are two action items that I can bring, and I know that we're being cautious of time, so that's where I'm going to leave it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. It's wonderful to have a Latina voice on these calls.
Yes.
Is there, let's see, any other hands?
Just a correction. There's two Latinas. I'm a Black Latina.
There's three.
That's right.
I just have less than an accent.
Excellent.
We should probably bring up the
next slide. Well, actually, I'll just bring it up because it's not on a slide. But so the next, looking to the future, there are 3 events that's coming up. We call this the second part of this program. Actually, it's the 28th of April, the Horizon Foundation's Community Summit, Reimaging Good Health for All, Dismantling Systemic Racism, is from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. You all might have received you probably heard it during the announcements after Mass, and probably has seen other advertisement. And there was a registration as well. Is it 29th? Thank you, the 29th. And you have to register. And so please, I don't know if registration is closed, but please try to register. But it's from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. I believe lunch is going to be provided. You'll have, more famous people than myself and Anna. Soledad O'Brien is presenting. But again, it's the 29th. It says the 28th, it's the 29th. On May the 3rd, we have Honest Conversations About Racism 2.0, our final session, which is going to be the topic of the criminal justice system. And that will be at 7 p.m. So please register for that. And then also the 17th of May, we are going to have the Way Forward, which is a program for all of us who have participated in these sessions, as well as anyone who hasn't been here. We still have the presentations on the parish's website. So we encourage you, if you haven't been throughout, and joined us throughout all of the sessions, to please take a look at the presentations. And it'll be a time for us to come in person and fellowship and really go through action items. And those are the things we will be looking to the future with. I want to thank you all again before we go to our closing prayer for taking the time to be with us. And Liz is going to provide a survey in the chat for this session. I know there's been a lot of chats in there, but if you can please look at the one from Liz Moriella, who is going to provide a link to the survey. Please take the time to fill out the survey. We do, as a group, look at your responses. And we actually do respond and try and do something different if it's needed for the next session. But thank you again, Anna. And I would like to thank you again for joining us. And again, on behalf of the Racial Justice Committee of St. John's Parish. Anna, do you want to give the close?
Sure.
Thank you.
O Lord our God, in your mercy and kindness, no thought of ours is left unnoticed, no desire or concern ignored. You have proven that blessings abound when we fall on our knees in prayer, and so we turn to you in our hour of need. Surrounded by violence and cries for justice, we hear your voice telling us what is required, only to do justice and to love goodness and to walk humbly with your God. Fill us with your mercy so that we in turn may be merciful to others. Strip away pride, suspicion, and racism so that we may seek peace and justice in our communities. Strengthen our hearts so that they beat only to the rhythm of your holy will. Flood our path with your light as we walk humbly toward a future filled with encounter and unity. Be with us, O Lord, in our efforts, for only by the prompting of your grace can we progress toward virtue. We ask this through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thank you all again. You all have a great evening, the rest of your evening. And hopefully we'll see you in May, and then again in May in person. And bring someone the next time. Again, I always say that, encourage other people to sign on. But thank you all again.